In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Amen. Please be seated. This morning, we find ourselves running smack into the middle of a funeral. That would be a little shocking, wouldn't it, if we were walking down the street and came around the corner and boom, there we are, right in the middle of one. It would be strange for us, but honestly it wouldn't be that strange for Jesus because that's the way they did it in the day. But learning about burials and stuff in seminary was quite fascinating. We had to learn, first of all, the different customs and different denominations throughout the world and how their beliefs, in case you're in a hospital, etc., and talking to somebody and understand, say, Jewish belief or somebody else's belief, Catholic belief. And so it was quite interesting to learn about all of that and learning how they did funerals, say, Dominican Republic or Central America, South America, Russia, different places. But we also learned a lot about right here in this country. And I was really surprised, I guess maybe more, I never thought about it, but how in the United States itself, how we have pulled ourselves so far from death. And when the professor said that, I was like, what? What are you talking about? But when he started talking about it, he was absolutely right. What he means by it is, compared to just 50 or 100 years ago, we've pulled ourselves away from death as a society. And his whole purpose of saying it is that it's kind of cut the grief as well as the giving and love that we can give somebody, the compassion to give to somebody. He went on to say, basically, as I want to tell you, that if I died today, most likely I would probably have died in a hospital. And from the hospital, my family would come around me and see me maybe for a few minutes, and maybe the hospital chaplain would come down and a few prayers are said unless a priest could be called from somewhere. And so the family would spend that little bit of time. And then they would whisk me off to a funeral home somewhere where they would prepare me. They would dress me, take care of whatever needs, put me in a casket. And there I would probably stay, or if I'm cremated, maybe a few more days, one or the other. But my family wouldn't see me until the wake or maybe the funeral itself. And it's the same with my friends. They probably wouldn't see me at all. And they would probably just hear of the death, and the next time they see me would be in the church itself. But it's not just the person who has died. But think about the family. The family, when this happens, they're making all the arrangements through the hospital. And then usually the next day or two, they're running over to the funeral home and making arrangements, as we call it, to make sure everything is taken care of. What does the person want? Here are the clothes to bury them in, and all of that. And then usually they'll run either to the graveyard or to the flowers if that hasn't been arranged by the funeral home and take care of all that. And then they come to the church and they start making arrangements for the service and making all kinds of decisions. And what I have found and seen is in all of this time, there's so much busyness that the person doesn't even give time to grieve. The next time they see their family member, it may be in the church itself. And then they go and they bury them. And everyone walks away. But 100 years ago, maybe even less than that, if I died, I probably would have died at home. There with my family and friends of my village around me. There in my home, my family or a good friend would either build me a box or they would have purchased me one that would have been delivered to the home. And so again, everyone is around there day and night. They would lay me out and they would take care of me. The family itself would have time to prepare and taking care of the person. But while they're doing this, they can grieve. And not only can they grieve, but the friends come to the family's home and they will not just stay there for 10 minutes or just come in for the 1 hour. They would usually stay there, maybe even into the late evening, sometimes overnight. And there they would have time to grieve. And they would also have time to give compassion. When it was the day of the time for your funeral, a lot of times before cars, there were two ways of doing it. If it was close enough, actually your pallbearers would come and they would pick you up out of your home, and there they would carry you on their shoulders as they would take you and walk you to the church itself, with all of the people not going to the church first, but a lot of times to your home, and there they would start following you. And there they continue to grieve and talk with each other. And then after the service, of course, you go to the burial and people are all around. And there, people have all grieved together. You see the difference in the time that we have pulled death away from us compared to when it was around. And so what we find are people don't really get a lot of time to grieve anymore, nor do we get a lot of time to give compassion for those who are grieving. The other thing we got to learn about is not just the history of the funerals here, but the different ones that happen in the United States. Here, of course, in the Episcopal Church, I love our burial, our celebration of life. Everything, I love the liturgy and how it's all put together and the proper timing of everything. And isn't that the word to use since we come from this England background? Everything is proper. Right? In the Episcopal Church, we want everything to be proper. Everything has to have class, and it's beautiful. And it is beautiful. But we're not the only way, and this is not the only way that funerals are done. They're done in a wide variety of ways throughout the United States. From my hometown, out on the islands, people will come when someone has died, and a person will come up and talk about the deceased, and all the stories about them, and all the fun about them. And then suddenly the choir and the people of the church begin to sing, and the next person will come up, and they'll talk about their story. And what they start doing is they're threading these together, these memories, and then the choir will get back up. And sometimes these funerals can last 3, sometimes 4 hours, because what they're doing is they're celebrating it. But what we all know is, say, like New Orleans, right? There are some that people that want to be carried out from the church. And there's a band behind them, and they're playing. And personally, I think it's probably the best way. I think. That's the way I would like it. And people are playing music, and people are having a good time. But what's really interesting is in New Orleans is people see it, and they see the crowd, and they begin to come in. They may not even know the person, but they go to start celebrating. And suddenly, down the street is this wide amount of people walking and celebrating all the way to the grave. Well, it's that large crowd that we're seeing today in the city of Nam. Jesus is coming up to the city gates. And as he comes to the city gates, suddenly people are coming out. Now, Jesus would have known probably what's going on. He would have seen the crowd in the very front coming out. There you start to see people crying from family and friends, as well as professional mourners. Believe it or not, they had professional mourners back then. And the reason being is, unlike us who kind of cry to ourselves, in that culture, it's screaming. It's really, actually I think it's healthy. They're letting the grief out. And so there's crying and screaming going on from the families. But they hire professional mourners to do the same thing around them. And the reason being is if people see you, they don't know who's family and who's the professional mourner. In a way, it's giving you privacy in public. And so Jesus would have seen that. And then, of course, you would see probably an opening that would happen real quick. And then it's the pallbearers with the stretcher carrying the young man. The reason why you wouldn't see the people right up next to them is you cannot touch the pallbearer or the person or the stretcher. The reason being is you have to, first of all, people would be really angry with you. It's a huge taboo. And in that taboo, you would have to then go through, explain to the rabbi why you did such a thing, which would have been horrifying. And then you have to go through a cleansing series, a purification cleansing. And so you just don't do it. So as the person's being walked, you would make sure that you're staying away far enough that you didn't touch these people. And then, of course, the mother and the rest of the group is coming up behind her. And this is what we are this morning. This is what Jesus sees. So he knows exactly what's happening, and he's looking at it. And it says that he sees the crowd, he sees the person, and then he sees the mother. And there she is crying. And Jesus has, it says, deep compassion for her. Deep compassion. Why? Well, one of the reasons could be that this is her only son that died. And what else about her? Luke wants us to know. She's a widow. And remember how I've taught you in the past that if one's son died and they were a widow, suddenly they're exposed to the world. If she owns property, people could come in and try to swindle it. People could even take her money. Once the money's gone, she could be sold into slavery. She could be put into as a servant, just getting bread for herself. Physical things could happen to her, and she has no recourse. And so you can imagine her crying because she's not only she lost her son, but in reality she's lost her own life too. And it says Jesus has compassion, and no one, we don't know exactly why he had this compassion. It could have been that that Nain is only 5 miles from Nazareth. Maybe he knew her. I've often wondered, did he sit there and look at her and think of his own mother Mary at the time of his death? What's going to happen? How will she be? Will that be her crying her heart out? Or was it that he knew that she not only lost her son, but her own life too? Whatever the reason, he has compassion. And he goes up to her and says, "Do not weep." And he walks up to the pallbearers, which I'm sure everyone's eyes are getting bigger, going, what is this nut doing? As he's walking up and he touches the pallbearers and he touches the stretcher itself. I'm telling you, you don't do this. It's a huge taboo. People would have been shocked. People would have been gasping. People would have been going, oh my God, can you believe what he's doing? And suddenly, because Jesus is reaching out, suddenly the eyes are on Jesus, no longer at the funeral. The eyes would have been on him. What is he doing and what is he about to do? I know to us today, it doesn't sound like a big deal to touch a casket or touch a person that died, but to kind of give you a small glimpse of what that tableau looks like. When I was in seminary and they were teaching us how to do the burial, this story went around and was taught by the professors. Why? Because it happened several times. The story was about a young priest, and I think it was his first or second funeral. And he did a beautiful job. He did exactly the way he was supposed to. The church, everyone loved it. It was beautiful, great music. And they went out and got in the hearse. They went to the graveyard. And there he opens his book, and again he's doing the beautiful prayers. He's doing exactly what he's supposed to. He takes his handful of dirt to put on the casket as he's going, ashes to ashes, dust to dust, and talking about the earth. And as he walks up to the casket to put it on, he doesn't realize that the grass has been watered, and he slips, and he goes into the grave. See how you just responded? That's how they would have responded. You've got to be kidding. When this happened, of course, chaos happened. People gasped. People are like, oh my God, what's happened to him? People are in panic. Suddenly, there's no funeral anymore. It's now a rescue mission. And so they take the casket. They have to take the person off. They're going down. They're getting this poor guy out, which is he's probably still in a corner somewhere shaking. But what I'm saying, it's over. Because imagining that happening, you can imagine you would tell everybody what you saw. It would have been scary. It's something that's not usual. And this, in a small way, is what we see with Jesus. But Jesus puts himself out there because he has compassion. And he tells the young man, get up. Good thing it worked, huh? The young man gets up and he begins to talk. And he takes the young man and gives him back to the mother. What Jesus has done is not about the son, it's about the mom. He has saved her life. He has saved her life. My question for you this morning is, how is your compassion? As Christians, how is your compassion? You see, we're supposed to mimic our God. We're supposed to mimic who God is and by what Jesus does. What does our compassion look like as Christians? Sometimes I get concerned. I see sometimes we do great jobs at compassion, but then on the flip side, I also see really lack of compassion, even among us as Christians. When I see things on the internet and people have written something and all of a sudden everyone wants to just tear them up. All of a sudden it's name calling, it's things being said about them, and I'm like, how can you do that? You weren't there. You don't know the situation, yet you're suddenly telling parents how they should parent, or how a husband or a wife should act. Suddenly you're the expert at everything that's going on, instead of having compassion going, I wonder what really happened. Or, how are they doing? We need to be like God. We need to have compassion for one another. Let me explain. God himself has such compassion. We see it today in the Old Testament. We see through Elijah that he saves the young boy and the widow, even when they didn't have hardly any food left to eat. We see this morning Jesus raising the young boy and giving back to his mother because he had compassion. But we also see Jesus, God's only Son, who dies. Why? Because God had compassion for each and every one of you. Think about that. His compassion for you was so heavy, His only Son died so that when He is risen, He absorbs you into the kingdom of heaven. And if our God is that loving throughout the history, as we see Him over and over being compassionate to His people over and over, shouldn't we be? Yes, we are compassionate. I will tell you, after the tornadoes, I couldn't have asked to see more compassionate people than right here in this church, of helping people and being there and providing lunches and all of that. But let me tell you, there's more times in our life we can be compassionate. Again, if our neighbor, our friends, our family are in trouble, are we really listening to what they say? You see, by listening to people, we can be compassionate. When we have a neighbor or a friend who is hurting because their marriage is on the rocks or over, are we really listening to them? Are we giving time to them? Are we letting them grieve? Are we giving compassion to them like we're supposed to? The person that we know that says, life has got to be better than this. Is this all it can provide for me? Are we not sharing who we are, listening to them, and helping them out of that situation? Because you see, when we have compassion, that compassion can change a life. It can maybe even save a life. When people are in the hospital or hurt or they've gotten bad news and they're at home, are we listening to them and are we praying? Because you see, prayer is compassion. And I can promise you, compassion can change lives. It may even save it. When you have somebody who is seeking something deeper than themselves, are we talking about our story? Are we inviting them to church? Are we telling them about God in our own life? Yes, it's called evangelism. And yes, we're trying to change that word as a positive, not a negative thing. Matter of fact, the presiding bishop calls it the Jesus movement. In other words, are we telling our story to others so that they know that there is more to life than what they think and that they have hope? Because you see, when we listen to them, that's compassion. And I'm telling you, you can change life. You may even save it. There are so many things we can do. But like Jesus, we have to put ourselves out there. We have to be the ones to stick our hand out there. Sometimes when people may laugh, they may look. But you know what? It's what we're called to do. Compassion. So be like Christ. Love your neighbor. Love your family. Love your friends. But most of all, be compassionate because you don't know their story until you've heard it.